the point is that there's a sense that there is a cultural identity and that Muslims need to integrate into it. Obviously, that's problematic, especially in the United States, where there's people who have been here for multiple generations who aren't newcomers to the land. But okay, let's say for the sake of argument, are Muslims in the West too focused on integration, or are they insufficiently focused on integration, or neither of those two things?
Gosh, I mean, I'm not even sure I understand the question, because what is integration? What is assimilation? What do these terms mean? And
so let's reframe the question. What would be a more intelligent question or a more nuanced question to ask?
It's a valid question, but I'm just saying we need to deconstruct it, and because it's too abstract.
Yeah.
And we need to know exactly what are we talking about with this particular group of people in this particular country in the light of its history, et cetera, et cetera. Otherwise, it becomes too vague. I think for my. I think in Britain, I think people, many non-Muslims, increasingly now are vocalizing, because of political changes, their opposition to the Muslim presence in Britain, and this is alarming and worrying. And I think part of it is just, if I can put it somewhat, not crassly but superficially, it's a question of good manners, because. Many Muslims in the 1960s, 1970s were invited to the United Kingdom to help, rebuild the country after the Second World War, to build industries, the National Health Service, the steel industry, and so on. They were invited to come to the UK as guests to live there, so live there. And so, they had children, and now their grandchildren are growing up, and to suddenly turn around, later and say, well, we don't really like you being here. I think, excuse me, I mean, where's your good manners? I know it sounds superficial, but it's a simple question of, you don't treat people like that. You don't invite them in to do a hard job of work, which they did, and they did it well, and then say, well, we don't really like you here anyway. Excuse me, that's my first objection. But also within this is other issues to do with racism and the way that anti-Muslim sentiment is being whipped up in the West. It's not just a parochial British issue, I think. We're seeing the rise of populist right-wing movements in Europe, and obviously in this country, in the States as well. So it is a macro movement going on here.
Absolutely.
It's not just within the confines of the UK. And that's the issue here. What's happening to the West at the moment, that I think is the issue. But I think people need to be reminded, like during the Second World War, if you want to be jingoistic, millions and millions of Muslims fought on behalf of us, the West, over against them, the Nazis, if you want to put it that way. In the British Empire, Muslims in India, for example, millions of them gave their lives or their time to defend what they saw as a just cause. And I'm not in any way casting doubt on that. Aspersions, it's not my place to do that. So I think, again, an ingratitude for what we've done. And I go to a mosque in London called Regent's Park Mosque. It's a fascinating place where I said my Shahada, but this is no ordinary mosque. It was given by, at the request of Winston Churchill after the Second World War, on behalf of a grateful nation, in the name of the King, to the Muslims in gratitude for their duty to Britain in fighting. And so the land was given by royal decree for the Muslims, and the mosque was built. And here we are, Regent's Park Mosque. And the trustees, the people who run the mosque, are the ambassadors from the Muslim world. So I think the Saudi ambassador is our treasurer, about which I will say nothing, but it means we're not likely to go broke anytime soon, hopefully. But, these symbolic gestures, or more than gestures, are good and healthy and positive. And we're missing these notes of gratitude, these notes of appreciation for what the Muslims have done in building up Britain after the war, and still what they're contributing today. I don't mind criticism of Muslims at all. I think often we've done things terribly. I'm not going to, maybe we'll talk about that, but at least appreciate the good things and express that. And that's missing in the discourse that I hear in the media.
Yeah, no, I agree with that sentiment as well. And that's funny that you mentioned that last point, because two recent talks I've given in various mosques across the country dealing with Islamophobia actually I began the talks by saying what Islamophobia is not. And one of the things that I mentioned is that Islamophobia is not when people hold us and our community accountable for how we do or do not contribute to the places in which we live. Like, we have to be open to those conversations. If we are not holding our weight, if we are not, if we're being too insular, and I know that's a politicized and touchy subject and very subjective, but I mean, we need to be able to point to things to say, we built this and we contributed that and we did these things. And I see that both sides, maybe there's a bit of extremism going on. There's a lot of political opportunism going on from those on the far right who are attempting to use these scare tactics, and they're very old scare tactics, in order to gin up this this boogeyman and this opposition. It's usually it papers over the real issues that are going on. When I was visiting Ireland, one of the things that I remarked was the threat to local culture is less about a biryani and it's more about McDonald's. Right, like neoliberal capitalism is probably more likely to drive down birth rates and alienate you, puts pressures on you so that families drift apart and fracture, and you lose your culture and you lose your way of life. I see that probably neoliberal capitalism is more responsible than Muslim immigrants, right? For that. So there's a middle ground, right? And I think that deals with that question well, which is really overly broad. It's about any relationship. If we imagine two individuals, right, it has to be a give and take, and that can be also true for two communities. As a give and take. Neither is it entitlement on either side, right? I think that's a key point. We've got a couple of questions here that are more about interfaith and personal issues, if you would humor them. And this is, I think, a good one for you for something that you've already expressed. What's the most beautiful thing you've learned from another faith?
Learned from another faith? Yeah, I mean, as a Christian, I learned many of the rudiments of faith, which I still hold dear now. I mean, one of the things I still treasure are the extraordinary Psalms in the Jewish Bible, or what Christians call the Old Testament, the Psalms of David. The Lord is my shepherd, and so on. Beautiful Psalms. And of course, the Quran also references the revelation given to David. Now, whether or not that's coterminous with what we have now in the Old Testament, I don't know. But I like to think that much of it is still intact there. And the Book of Psalms is often called the prayer book of the church, for example. I think of another thing that I still respect enormously, and the Quran alludes to this a little bit, is to an institution which is not authorized by God, but nevertheless, in monasticism, the idea of priests and monks. And thinking of the election of the recent Pope Leo XIV. Now, of course, it's very early days. So we don't know him very well. He's an American citizen, apparently, born in Chicago.
Deep dish pizza for everybody.
Exactly. What a shock to everyone. Thought, no way would he be an American, but hey, he's there. But he strikes me as the kind of man, unless I'm misreading it, maybe I am, the kind of man that the Quran speaks very forthrightly of those who Muslims who encounter difficulties with, some Jews and the polytheists. But it separates out those who are humble and are not arrogant.
Yes.
And it specifically mentions, I think, monks and priests, I think it is. And I tweeted on that about a week ago when the current Pope was elected in the Vatican. And I thought, that verse, unbelievable, it shouldn't be unbelievable, it's God's word, but unbelievably timely, that verse. And I tweeted it, and wow, this is laser-like. This is fantastic. The Quran speaking directly to our contemporary world. How true that is. Even though monasticism and the priesthood is not from God in that sense, institutional sense.
Yes.
But nevertheless, these people are not arrogant. They're not enemies of Muslims.
Right. Allah mentions it there and also in Surah Al-Hadid. And even though he criticizes, or there is a criticism there for having invented it and not having stuck to it properly, there is an implicit praise, I think, which is what you're sensing and pointing out, that it's from their goodwill, right? Like the fact that they instituted it at all, and the fact that there are people who are true worshipers, humble.
And I've known priests and monks in my life who are like that, actually. And if you were to speak to them about Islam, they would listen. I don't mean just with their ears, but with their hearts. You get a real sense that these are people who God can, people who can be, in a sense, ultimately Muslims if they were to embrace Islam. Yeah.
So let's take that in a little bit of a different direction. So what's one Islamic teaching that you think that Christians often overlook?
Christians often overlook. Gosh, an interesting question. I think one of the things that really impressed me when I first encountered Islam or started to look into it was this whole, you see, if you're a Christian, normally now you have your personal relationship with God, personal relationship with Jesus. So you have a regular job and you go to the pub or the bar and you have your family or you watch TV. And then on a Sunday you'll spend 45 minutes intensely worshipping Jesus, and then that's your religious duty, by the way. And then you may be, if you're particularly pious, you may read the Bible a couple of times a week, but most probably don't. And this is kind of, I don't mean to start, be too rude about it, but it's more or less like that. Islam has, to use our language, it has the deen, encompasses all of life. So Islam, faith, religion has a public role. There is a role in our societies for divine law, because God made us. He's the Lord of creation. He knows how to organize societies in ways that enhance human flourishing and success in this life and the next. There's a reason why some things are haram, like interest or riba. There's these things are damaging. Like gambling is damaging. Alcohol can destroy lives and so on. So it's that whole public social dimension to faith, understood in its widest expansive sense, that is missing in Christianity today. It wasn't always the case, and so Islam steps into the conversation and says, no, we have an understanding of society which is much more holistic on many, many levels, not just on the private, my private relationship with God. So that is fantastic news. If people want an alternative to the crass consumerism and materialism that the West embodies and exports to the globe. There is an alternative. And the thing is, this is the only alternative that I'm aware of in the world to this. It's not like we have a supermarket of options. Oh, I'll have the Muslim option as opposed to there is no other option. I mean, since when is any other faith doing this?
And not in a way that is actually scalable. Like you can't have a country of Buddhist monks, who's going to bake the bread.
Judaism, for all its, is for Jews. It's not for the whole human race.
Yes.
And they're supposed to be calling to Tawhid. That's the prophets in the Jewish Bible talking to the Israelites. Your role is to be a light to call the nations to the worship of the one true God. They're not doing that in the main. So, but Islam is.